What's going on, Giants fans? Daryl Slater here with Bob Brookover, the latest episode of the Talk is Cheap Giants podcast from NJ Advanced Media, the Star Ledger, NJ.com, coming at you here on Tuesday, December the 13th, a couple days after the Giants, well, got obliterated by the Eagles. Of course, it doesn't necessarily mean that the season is over. Far from it. Let's real quick before we launch into things. This is where the Giants are at, big picture wise. They started the season 6-1, then 7-2. They've hit a bit of to say the least, a slump here. They're 7-5-1. They haven't won in 4 games. They're 1-4-1 since their 6-1 start. So 7-5-1, currently the 7th and final seed in the NFC playoff pecking order. Really tied with Washington, but Washington currently wins the tiebreaker or because they've won a division game. But this game coming up Sunday night, massive one in Washington, Sunday Night Football. The Giants this will determine the tiebreaker with Washington unless they tie again, which I don't think is likely. So this is where the Giants stand. They need to start winning some games here. They finish up with Washington, then go to Minnesota on Christmas Eve. Then they host the Colts in a very winnable game. And then January the 8th, well, maybe the 7th, the finale in Philadelphia, which may be resting its starters, which is an important thing to look at here. So the Giants currently have 7.5 wins. The bottom line is they probably need to get to 9.5 wins to get in the playoffs. Seattle's the 8 seed right now at 7-6. Detroit the 9 at 6-7. Detroit, and we'll get into all this, has really an outside chance here of pushing in. If you look at 538, the Giants currently still have a 45% chance of making the playoffs. So that's where they're at. Bottom line, it's not a must win. It's not a winning in or a losing out on Sunday night in Washington, but it's a pretty darn important game, Bob.
Yes. The moment of reckoning has come for the Giants. They've been leaking oil for a while. And they, the first half, the 6-2 start, the 6-1, 6-2 start, 7-2 start, really, because they won the first game after the bye, has put them in this position. But the bad streak of football that they've been locked in needs to stop right now. It might not be a playoff game, but it's pretty much a playoff game. They're going to play on a national stage Sunday night against a team they tied 2 weeks ago. They had countless chances to put that game away and didn't. Now they need to go to Washington and win in a very, in a very difficult situation too, because Commanders are coming off a bye week. Commanders are coming off a game against the Giants. They got all week to rest up and study the Giants while the Giants were getting their brains beat in by the Eagles and suffering some more injuries. So they're up against it. Let's put it that way.
They are, no doubt. And they, Washington being at home, another advantage there for Washington in this game. And, you look at the game, the Giants with 7 wins this year, they've won 4 times as an underdog. And it's the games you can imagine, whatever. But, I go back into, Packers and Ravens and Titans and whatever, one other one in there. And they got to go ahead and try to win it as an underdog, obviously, this week. Right now, the line is, I don't know, whatever it is. So
4.5, I think.
4.5. So, this is obviously 4.5. One more thing on the playoff situation, just in terms of the nuts and bolts of it. It's important to remember that the Giants, because they have a tie, have 7.5 wins. And so unless Seattle or Detroit gets a tie, the tiebreaker against those two teams wouldn't come into play. Yes, Seattle and yes, Detroit both have the tiebreaker advantage over the Giants. But no, you can't tie unless, Seattle also ties or Detroit ties. Does that make sense? So
that makes perfect sense.
Look, I mean, Seattle or Detroit could beat
the tiebreaker's only in play here with the Commanders.
Right. And really, this game is going to determine who has the advantage in that part of the pecking order here.
Unless they tie.
Yeah, I know. I suppose it's possible. And like you said, the Giants had every opportunity to win that game. They were not able to win it 2 weeks ago. And so everything looking in the Commanders' favor in this game. The Giants obviously trying to get some important players back healthy this week. I mean, you saw how depleted their secondary is. I mean, they've tried to make this work without Adoree Jackson and Xavier McKinney. But the bottom line is it's just not sustainable. Like Fabian Moreau is not a number one or probably even number two starting cornerback. Darnay Holmes is in the slot, who's their starting slot cornerback, has, we got roasted and toasted last week. I mean, Terry McLaurin, he ate their lunch a couple weeks ago, and you wonder how sustainable is this if they don't get some of these players back? And right now, here's where they're sitting on the injury front in terms of the team that, the Giants have had such an enormous amount of attrition. Xavier McKinney, Dory Jackson, Leonard Williams, the three key defensive players who didn't play last week. We'll see. I mean, it's not a lock that any of those three are back.
It's not, and if I was asked, put to it and said, which of those three do you think are going to play? I would say the best chance is probably Leonard Williams. I don't think Dory is going to be ready, and I'm skeptical that Xavier is going to be ready. And those two might be more important than Leonard, just because the secondary has been a real problem. In recent weeks, it was a real problem against the Eagles. Although, it's they're not the first team that's had a problem against the Eagles wide receivers and quarterbacks. But they were 6-3 when Xavier went down, I guess, or when Dory went down, and they're 0-3-1 since then. Been outscored 121-77. It's not good. It's not a good situation at all for the Giants. They've defied things all year. So here's another one. They were 6-2 at the bye week before McKinney suffered his injury, and giving up 345 yards a game, under 20 points a game. Since then, they're 1-3-1, have allowed 403 yards and 28 points a game. I mean, almost 10 points more and almost 70 yards more.
Yeah, I mean, they really miss them.
They have. And, the one thing they made a big deal about, and I don't know how much it matters, is that, they talk about, I think Xavier was the one who said this to me after the game on Sunday. We need to communicate better. And he's obviously the guy in charge of communication for the back end of that defense. I don't know how much that's a factor. It's impossible for us to know from where we sit. But there's obvious problems. And I would venture to say it's probably just more about, you got young guys in the heat of this battle for the first time. The strength of schedule was elevated after the bye week. It's just been a combination of the perfect storm for not being able to win games has hit the Giants, and there's not a lot they can do about it now except go play the Commanders and see how it turns out.
Look, I think the bottom line is, this 6-1 start, 7-2, kind of maybe lulled people into thinking that the Giants are going to cruise into the playoffs, and it was never going to be easy for this team. They have had a very small margin for error. The roster is what it is, not particularly talented. So at 7-5-1, I think if anyone said, you're going to be 7-5-1 going into the final four games, would you take it? Of course they would take it. I mean, people looked at this team and thought maybe they win 4, 5, 6 games all year. And so they're in a position where they're still defying expectations. And look, I think even if they don't make the playoffs, we'll see how the season ends, if we can deem it fully successful. But they put themselves in a position and gave themselves a lot of wiggle room that they've now, the wiggle room's gone, obviously, but they've sort of regressed a bit to what everyone thought they would be. But I think still, if you look at 7-5-1, they'd obviously take that now. How sustainable is any of it if they don't get McKinney back, Jackson, Leonard Williams, and you talk about some of the other injured guys, Ben Bredesen still dealing with his knee injury. Shane Lemieux and Josh Azudu, their left guard situation is just a wreck right now because those are the three left guards and they're all hurt. In terms of just putting a bow on the other injury stuff, Daniel Bellinger hurt his ribs on Sunday against the Eagles. Micah McFadden has got an ankle, I think a knee also. So
his neck, he had a stinger on.
Yeah, so Richie James is in the concussion protocol. Now you talk about Micah McFadden. Well, he's playing a lot for them now, and Richie James, he's not a great.
Mike McFadden has essentially replaced Tate Crowder.
Exactly. So Richie James is not Devin Hester, but they need someone to catch punts. So,
right.
So that's where they're at right
You
now.
know, the other thing I was thinking about with McKinney and Jackson, you know, they weren't going to make a difference against the Eagles. They weren't going to win that game anyway. But if you go back to this 20-20 tie, when the Commanders tie the game late, you know, they are two guys who could make a play. You know, are good enough playmakers. You know, maybe come up with a pick or you know a big breakup. So their presence there, and that in that one game that looms so important now for the Giants, they could have been a difference. And now, you know, if they can't play this game, again, it's going to loom as a big deal that they can't play in this game.
Yeah, for sure. And injuries and a poor secondary and a depleted secondary certainly not the only issues for the Giants right now. They're dealing with their.
I was just going to say the one, you know, and the one other thing about it is, which I wrote about yesterday, is that both of those injuries could have been avoided, should have been avoided.
Yeah, you know, between the Xavier McKinney's decision to get on the ATV in Mexico and Brian Dable's decision to put Adoree Jackson on punt return against the Lions, certainly definitely could have been avoided. And you know that's not, like I said, not their only issue. They're dealing with a situation where Saquon Barkley, their best offensive player, has not been productive now for 4 straight weeks, for various reasons. I mean, once they got behind by a lot last week, they were not going to keep pounding the running game. But not only has he not been productive now, he's dealing with a neck injury that he's trying to fight through, and so there's sort of the twin storylines here of like, how can they possibly win any of these games down the stretch if Barkley continues to slump? And you know, if he continues to slump, how can you possibly pay him next offseason? And so the more immediate concern, obviously, for the Giants is getting him productive and turning this back into a semi-competent offense that can help them maybe win a game or two. Um, how concerning is it here with the way Barkley has performed and the fact that he's dealing with this neck injury now?
Yeah, I mean that's something that has to happen on Sunday night. They have to get Barkley going. You know, it doesn't matter at what point they get him going. They need to. He needs to have one of those big games he had earlier in the season, because if you look at it, I mean, there's only, you know, really there's three guys on this team, skill players right now, that are healthy, semi healthy in Barkley's case, that are capable of making big plays. Jones, uh, Barkley, and Darius Slayton, which is quite a story in itself. But you know, after that, if not those three, who? You know, I guess they were hoping Bellinger could, and you know, he's helped the offense since he's come back. But again, now he's hurt again. So, and really, Barkley's got to be the guy, and it's a lot to ask of a guy who's been um, been beat up all season. You know, in addition to the neck, he's still got shoulder problems, I think, and maybe those two are connected. Who knows? I mean, obviously they can be. So you wonder if he can get back to where he was, and as you kind of alluded to at the opening of this. If he can't, how are the Giants taking all this in? Because they're still looking. Joe Shane and Brian Dable are still looking at the big picture, even as they focus on this playoff push. You know, okay, what do we do about Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones going forward? You have to think they look at it and say, do we really want to invest in a guy who just plays this position? He's great at it, but he plays this position that you get beat up, and this is what happens in this league. Um, you know, and if you do keep him, you need to get, you know, so many teams have gone to the two-back system where they just try to keep, you know, keep guys fresh. How would Barkley respond to that? But B, is that a better option for the Giants going forward than the one where you know you have a feature back who by the end of the season is worn down?
Yeah, I mean, speaking of worn down and slowing down, Barkley actually did a really nice job in the first half against the Commanders. If you go back and look at his carries from that first game 2 weeks ago, his first 10 carries gained 64 yards, and that was the totality of his production in the first half. And he closed out that half with a 21-yard run. He had a 13-yard touchdown in that first half. And then in the second half and overtime, he ran 8 times for -1, which is almost impossible. I mean, so these were his 8 carries in the second half and overtime. -1, or I'm sorry, -4, then 1, then 1, 0, then -1, then 0, then -3, and then 5. So a total of -1 yard on 8 carries in the second half and overtime against the Commanders as the Giants, basically wilted in that game. So he was able to be productive against them early on. It'll be interesting to see how the Giants attack Washington here in this game, and how Washington, with that fresh film on what they were able to do so well against Barkley in the second half, attacks the strongest part of the Giants' offense and tries to turn it into a weak point. And speaking of, one big picture problem with this Giants' offense that certainly hasn't been a strong point, is you wrote about it today, the lack of big plays. I mean, they're at the bottom of the league, especially in the passing game.
Well, it's a big problem, and it was a problem last year, a more explainable one last year because at certain points for long stretches you were playing your backup and you're playing Jake Fromm. You're lucky to get plays, let alone big plays. Just get the play off when you have Jake Fromm as your quarterback. But this year they've had a healthy Daniel Jones, and Barkley has played every game and come back to the level he was at as an elite back, and you're still not getting big plays. That's something that it's not going to be able to change in the next 4 weeks. They are what they are, and maybe it's different if Wan'Dale Robinson can play a little bit different, because he certainly has big play capability with his speed. But it's not going to change this year, but it needs to change next year. And Brian Dable and Joe Shane know that. Brian Dable came from the Bills, who were great at making big plays with Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs, and Mike Kafka came from the Chiefs, who spit out big plays every other play. So these guys know that. Now they got to figure out how to fix it. But in the meantime, they got to play 4 more games and try to get into the playoffs.
And at this point, every NFL team has played 13 games, so the total stats are equal. But so the Chiefs lead the NFL right now with 60 passing plays of 20 plus yards. And the Giants.
My favorite stat there is the Chiefs, counting their running plays this year, have 68 plays of 20 plus yards, which is how we define big plays in this case. 68 of them. The Giants have had 73 in the last 2 seasons.
Insane.
So go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, the Chiefs are far and away the top team. So 48 for the Dolphins are second, then 47 for the Bengals. So even if you look at the Chiefs as an outlier, the really good NFL teams are 48, 47, 46, 45 passing plays of 20 plus yards. I mean, even the Jaguars have 44 and the Eagles are 45. You talk about the Bills at 43. So the Giants currently have just 21 passing plays of 20 plus yards. The next worst team being the Ravens at 27, Falcons at 30, the Bears even at 31. So to have that few big passing plays is really hard, and Brian Dable knows this, like you said, to win. He had a really good point, an interesting point, I thought, that we brought up before you brought up before we started recording, right, yesterday on this teleconference or Zoom call, talking about their pass blocking.
He knows it's a problem. When he was basically asked about Daniel Jones dealing with pressure in his face all the time, he basically said, he didn't call out the offensive line, but he addressed it by saying, Daniel's doing this right. He's doing this right. It's tough when there's pressure in your face. He's doing this right. He's doing this right, which was basically a veiled way of saying we have an offensive line problem.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean,
and that also probably trickles to the receivers too. I don't think he was making that point, but there was, and I said before, it might be different if Wan'Dale Robinson's around, and you also throw Sterling Shepard into that. If you had those 2 guys and Darius Slayton, now you got some threats in that offense, but they haven't had those guys. They barely had Slayton and Robinson all year. So, but I mean, not Slayton, Shepard and Robinson all year. But again, if you're looking at the future, which probably doing too much given that they're about to play a big game, but Okay, if you bring back Shepard, I don't know if they will, but certainly you're going to get Robinson back. I would think you'd bring back either Shepard or Slayton, one or the other, and then go try to find, the real big play guy. Um, Maybe Odell Beckham Jr. I don't know. Suddenly the talk is that's just disappeared. Um, you know, because it sounds like he's not really interested in playing in the regular season at all. And that's how he could probably help the Giants get into the playoffs. But whatever. It's the point is they have an offensive line problem, they have a receiver problem, and it's starting to sound as if, and maybe this is out of necessity because they're not going to be in a position to pick a quarterback high in the draft, that Daniel Jones is going to be their quarterback going forward. Because that's their best option. At least that's how I'm reading the tea leaves, and who knows? I could be wrong. I've been wrong a lot before.
Yeah, no, I think that the most likely way you're going to start over at quarterback is drafting one, and they're not really in a position to do it or to trade up for a quarterback. So, that they have to do a better job of putting pieces around Daniel Jones. And even if you do bring back Darius Slayton or Sterling Shepard, and we'll see, Sterling Shepard got, when is he even going to be healthy again? But Slayton's not a number one receiver. They need to go get a number one receiver. Wan'Dale Robinson's not a number one receiver. They need to go get somebody. And as far as Odell Beckham, he obviously did a really nice job of like trying to boost his market. But once the medical test came in, it's like, oh wait, this guy's not even going to be ready to play in the regular season. I love I don't need to play in the regular. You're not even going to be ready to play in the regular season anyway. It's hilarious. Like, I never wanted to anyway. Like, well, you're not healthy. Like, so. He's going to be 31 next year. Like they gotta get some weapons around Daniel Jones, and they also have to address their interior offensive line. Getting back to the point from earlier about that Dable quote yesterday, and I kind of zoned out a little bit during the Zoom call, but you brought it up before we started recording, and this was the quote. He's talking about. This isn't the full part of the quote, but when you get pressure right away in the pocket, this is the quote. Quote: When you get pressure right away in the pocket, and there's not much you can do, then the most important thing is to take care of the ball and to live to see another day. Okay, so he's basically saying their pass blocking stinks, and it did stink on Sunday. We'll get to the numbers on that in a second, but and so he goes on and talking about improvising and taking care of the ball. I'd say regularly you would try to eliminate the ones that they're right on him right now, meaning that the pass rush is right on him. So the first step here is not letting your quarterback feel the pressure in his face right away. And that happened quite a bit on Sunday. The Giants, with a 41.8 PFF pass blocking grade, their second worst of the season, ahead of only 35.9 in that Week 3 disaster loss against the Cowboys. And so they're going to have to. They're not going to be able to get rid of Mark Lewinsky, the right guard. They got to figure out a solution here at left guard and at center going forward. And they're committed to Evan Neal and committed to Andrew Thomas, who is Andrew Thomas played well for the most part. So they have to figure out a way to protect Daniel Jones and to get him some playmakers going forward. And like you said, they're going to have to try to smoke and mirrors it this week because that's not changing this week.
No, and you go back to Andrew Thomas for a second, and he has played well. I mean, it's been documented that he's been one of the best left tackles in the league this season. But his inability to block Josh Sweat early in the game kind of set the tone for Sunday. I mean, he allowed the sack early. The Giants moved the ball; they got a first down quick, and then he allows a sack to Josh Sweat, and which was kind of the way the Giants offense went the whole game against the Eagles is, it looks like, the whole game went that way. Oh, it looks like maybe they can do this. And then they're behind the chains. They score and then allow a 66-yard return, and they score, and then they allow a 35-yard return, and the Eagles got points again. But the fact that Andrew Thomas allowed that play. I mean, his play has slacked off a little bit. He didn't have a great game in Dallas. He did play pretty well against. I mean, he played okay against but he's not playing to the same top level he played early in the season. And this is a time where they really need all their veteran guys to be at their best. I mean, Fabian Moreau is not by any means a superstar, but he's a veteran guy who they had come to count on, and he had perhaps his worst game of the season. Two bad penalties. That again, it's early in a game, especially when you're at home against a really good team. You want to things to go as well as possible. They're off the field. They had stopped them, or maybe forced a field goal early in that game, and a penalty hands to the face on Devontae Smith off the line of scrimmage allows them to get a first down, and that becomes a touchdown. And these are veteran guys, and they need their veteran guys for Sunday night to be at their best. They need Dexter Lawrence to be at his best. They need Aziz Ojulari is only his second year, and he actually played a pretty good game, I thought, against the Eagles. And he's actually given them some more pass rush than they had. And Thibodeau's been playing well. They need all those guys, which, on defense, your edge rushers are your explosive players, and obviously Dexter Lawrence is their best player on defense. They need those guys to really come up and step up. And Julian, go back to another veteran guy, really counting on Julian Love. It's 4th and 7. You're off the field. If you stop them there, he allows the touchdown to Smith because he goes for the ball instead of the body. So they had a lot of veteran guys to kind of let them down on Sunday against the Eagles. They can't afford for that to happen against the Commanders. And obviously, that you're playing down a level than you were playing this week. But if you're going to be a good veteran player in this league, you live for games like the one you're about to play, and they need to be at their best Sunday night.
To your point about Andrew Thomas, looking at his game against the Eagles on Sunday, he had a 63 pass block grade. He allowed 3 pressures. The Cowboys game on Thanksgiving, a 56 pass block grade, 3 pressures. And in the other 11 games combined all year, he had only allowed 10 total pressures.
Right.
So, and his worst pass block grade was a 77 against the Ravens. So these two games, these two important division games, stand out as really poor performances by Andrew Thomas. Now,
he's allowed 3 sacks in the last 3 weeks, and he allowed 0 the first 11 games.
Yep, he allowed a sack against Washington. That was his only pressure allowed.
Right.
He did otherwise perform pretty well, it looks like, in that game. 5th best pass blocking grade of the year for him. So the Washington has a really good front. So that will be certainly a test for Andrew Thomas and this offensive line. And if he can play, if he can grade out like he did against Washington in that first meeting, that's an improvement certainly on how he did against Philly and Dallas in those meetings here recently. And the kind of the X factor for Washington now is they get Chase Young. I presume I said it maybe last time.
They've been saying it for 6 weeks.
Obviously, the guy had a setback at some point in his ACL, recovery, which is very unfortunate for him because he's a tremendously talented player. What do you make of what type of factor he could be, given this underlying or really overlying storyline of how poor their pass blocking has been?
Yeah, I think that part, maybe you can overhype a little bit because he hasn't played all season, and I do believe there's such a thing as football shape. Sometimes in those first games, adrenaline can carry a guy beyond what his and the tail off comes in the games after that because you kind of settle in. And he's obviously going to have a lot of adrenaline playing for the first time all year. The Commanders don't need any help up front. They're already pretty good, very good. So it's just another thing, the Giants have to deal with here. And there are a lot of things stacked against them in this game. The story we kept writing at the beginning of the season is, the Giants aren't supposed to be very good. They, as you said, they've won 4 games as underdogs. Well, they're an underdog again, and this is the one they have to win.
Yeah, and Washington is the 8th best pass rush team in the league. So now you talk about why they struggled against Philly and Dallas. Those are the 1-2 pass rush teams in the league. PFF has them there, and Washington, no slouches at 8. And, a possibility, like we said, that they could get Chase Young back, whatever he's able to give them. And Daniel Jones against the Eagles, how much was he under pressure? Well, he was under pressure on 18 of his 33 dropbacks. That's just not sustainable. Like especially when you're trying to come back. Obviously, when you're trying to come back in a game, teams know you have to pass. and they can, as they say, one of my favorite football euphemisms, pin their ears back and go after you. So that's part of it. That's certainly part of it. But if they want to repeat what they did against, and I just looked it up. I mean, the games that they were underdogs in: Jacksonville, Tennessee, Baltimore, Green Bay, and London. So if they want to repeat what they did in those 4 games, now granted, they were only underdogs because the Jaguars game was on the road. They're going to have to replicate that sort of resilient mindset in this game Sunday night against Washington, and the Commanders were actually favored by 2 points in that tie that Washington and the Giants had a couple weeks ago. So most broadly, I think if we just kind of expand it back out here, look, the Giants, it's about looking ahead here, and so it's not winning in or losing out, right? So like regardless of what happens, things could change down the stretch for the Giants. This is an enormous game, but as you look at the rest of it, with 4 games to go, the Giants 45% chance of making the playoffs according to 538. The Commanders at 73. But really, Seattle's the team to look at there at 55% chance, and then the Lions still kind of an outside chance at 20%. That's all projection. And the reason 538 projects some of that stuff is because of remaining strength of schedule. So with 4 games left, the Giants, as we said, Washington, Minnesota, Indy, Philly. That's what the Giants have ahead of them. They have the second strongest strength of schedule. Now, we'll get to a mitigating factor on that in a second. The Lions are 29 out of 32, so they have a really easy path ahead. Seattle is 8. Washington's 5. So the mitigating factor there for the Giants having the number 2 strength of schedule is that the Eagles in Week 18 in Philadelphia might be resting their starters. Do we think they would? If they're in a position, all right, so like if you're the Eagles and you've already locked up the bye, would you rest your starters in that game?
Here's how I would do it. I covered actually a lot of Eagles teams that had to face that situation. The year they went to the Super Bowl in 2004, Andy Reid rested his players. Essentially, he would play them a series, and for the last 2 games, and then had a bye week. Of course, Andy Reid also had a horrible record in the NFC Championship game. I think with the Eagles, they were 1-4 in his 5 NFC Championship games. So maybe his way wasn't the best way to do it. So I don't know how Nick Sirianni's going to do with these things. If it was me, I might play my players for a half, or at least some to keep them sharp. We know how Doug Peterson handled it 2 years ago when the Giants season was on the line, when they were playing with the Eagles playing the Commanders, and he played Jalen Hurts for a while and then sat him down. Went with his backup quarterback, and up in smoke went the Giants playoff hopes.
And went Doug out the door.
and out went Doug. Yes. So,
and you remember Joe Judge was kicking and screaming about that after the game, and that was obviously different because the Eagles' season was going nowhere, and so people were saying they basically tanked the game. But hey, look, here's the thing that's different now. Obviously, only one team in each conference gets the bye, and so the Eagles would be there's no longer 2 teams to get the bye. So the Eagles would be the total outlier among the teams heading into divisional round weekend, with their players potentially having not played in 2 weeks. Does that something that Nick Sirianni wants to do? I mean, getting his players out of rhythm. It's a fascinating thing here because it could definitely impact whether the Giants make the playoffs. Because even if they lose to Washington, the Giants could certainly beat the Colts at home, and if the Eagles rest their starters, the Giants could certainly win the finale in Philly. That would put the Giants at 9.5 wins. Hypothetically, if Washington wins Sunday, that gives them 8.5. And Washington closes with, and I don't have the exact order here, but the opponents Washington has to close are Dallas, San Francisco, and Cleveland. Not in that order.
Interesting enough, their last game is against Dallas in DC, Landover, Maryland, whatever.
Could Dallas be resting right?
Dallas could very well be resting their starters, locked into the 5 seed, because nobody's catching them from behind. and they might not have any chance to catch the Eagles. So it's very possible they're resting their starters too.
I think the team that,
Especially because they're going to have to play the next week.
and look, it's possible that both Washington and the Giants make the playoffs. It's entirely possible that happens.
Sure. Oh, yes.
Because the team, I mean, we talked about Detroit, right? So Detroit's closing strong, and they're kind of trendy right now because they have won 5 of 6. They've won 5 of 6. They were favored last week at home against the Vikings, beat the Vikings. They're favored this week at the Jets, but the Lions close with at Jets, at Panthers versus Bears, at Packers. So those are 4 winnable games for the Lions, who could no doubt get to 9 or 10 wins. But right now, the team that's nipping at the Giants' heels, and why that Sam Darnold performance in Seattle was so important for the Giants, is the Seahawks, who lost to Darnold and the Panthers at home. Brutal loss on Sunday. That happened after the Giants game. Seattle closes versus the 49ers on Thursday. Short week game, tough opponent. Obviously, no Jimmy Garoppolo. Then Seattle goes to the Chiefs, then versus Jets versus Rams. So 2 really tough games the next 2 weeks for Seattle, which is currently
the Jets aren't an easy game either. So I mean,
no,
yeah,
right, right, exactly.
they might have the toughest time of any team getting in. They really they look like they were ready to maybe even win the division when they beat the Giants out there in Seattle, but they've really tailed off since then.
Seattle was 7 wins right now at 7-6, and maybe they only get to 8. Maybe they only get to 8. And that would put the Giants, if the Giants can win one more game, that puts the Giants to 8.5 wins, and that automatically ahead of Seattle there. So, could the Giants get in with just one more win? I mean, that's entirely possible too, given the what Seattle has left. If Seattle only gets to 8 and the Giants win one more game, and they're also at 8, they're really at 8.5, and they're in ahead of Seattle. Now, obviously, Detroit. We'll see, because that's the other mitigating factor. Their surge and what they have to close the season. That Detroit Jets game on Sunday is really fascinating, and could go a long way toward determining some of the bottom of the NFC playoff picture for the Giants. So
I just want the if the Giants do get in as the 7th seed, I want them to I want those 49ers to catch the Vikings, because I'd much rather go to San Francisco than Minnesota in January after having been there on Christmas Eve.
yeah, I would say so. I would say that would be a bit more preferable.
The one other point I wanted to make too was about this upcoming game is, one thing the Giants did do and absolutely need to do on Sunday is, we are still just talking about Taylor Heineke here as the quarterback of the Commanders, and it's not, all credit to him. He's had them playing very well since he took over from Carson Wentz. But the Giants did sack him 5 times and pressured him a lot in that game, in the 20-20 tie. And they need more of the same in this game, because you can make a guy who's looked pretty good as a quarterback, who's probably just an average quarterback, look really bad if you put him under pressure.
The one thing the Giants better do, regardless of how well they're able to slow down Heineke, they better stop the run. I mean, they've just been an absolute disaster against the run. The Eagles ran for 253 yards. Washington and the tie ran for 165. The Cowboys 169. The Lions 160. Not surprisingly, the Giants didn't win any of those games. And so, we know just because we all were writing about this a couple weeks ago, how much the Commanders lean on the run because of their quarterback deficiencies. And so,
right.
Everyone knows that this team is going to run the ball. Stop the run. And that's where I think the Leonard Williams factor it could be big, because he is, for all of the talk about whether he can get sacks, whatever, and he made a bunch of money off the 1 year when he had a lot of sacks. He's been a really good run stopper throughout his career. That's one thing he's done really, really well ever since the Jets drafted him, is stop the run. And so he'll be a big factor in whether they're able to stop the run, and Brian Robinson and in this game on Sunday night. And so, yeah. So what do you think? How do you see it going? I know you filed your pick already. I'm not looking at it, but what's your pick for this game?
I picked it. I got to look at the score. I looked at your pick earlier today too. What did I picked the Commanders to win. I'm just trying to, and our scores were almost identical. Well, my score for this game was 24-21 Commanders.
Oh, you know what? It's crazy. I swear to God, I did not look at your pick before I made my pick, and I picked the same score. So, I didn't. I swear I
Oh,
didn't. And
wait. You know what? I
you're
just
looking at
screwed
mine?
that up. I just screwed that up. I'm looking at yours.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
hold on one
I
second.
still don't know. I still haven't looked at yours.
Hold on one second. Here's mine. I looked at the wrong one. I picked it. I screwed up. Well, it's still pretty funny. I picked it 23-21.
23 to 21. So you're
23
saying
to
the Commanders are going to win on a last second safety? Is that what's happening there?
Well, my favorite score of the week is Ravens 9, Browns 5. The Ravens have won 4 games this year, scoring under 20 points. And the last 4 weeks, they've scored like 13, 10, and some like 12, and one game scoring 13, 10, and 12. So
So we'll see what happens Sunday night. We've broken this down in this week and all the playoff permutations and the strength of schedule and who's left and all the percentages and the pecking order. But you know what? It all comes down to what happens on the field and all these what ifs and strength of schedule and percentages from 538 and all that stuff. It's just speculative and let's see what happens Sunday night. So it should be a fascinating game Sunday night in Landover. Enjoy the game to anyone who happens to be traveling down there. I would suggest taking the train and not doing that hellacious drive if you are making the trip down to
I'm
Landover,
doing the
Maryland.
drive. Come on, do the drive. Have some adventure.
I will not be doing the drive. I'll be taking the train, and hopefully, whoever goes to that game, it's a dump of a stadium. Let's be honest; it's a brutal place to see a game, but it is going to be a great, well, maybe not a great game, but a hugely important game for the Giants' playoff hopes. So we'll see what happens, and regardless of what happens, we'll be back here with you guys. Uh, Probably exactly a week from now, next Tuesday, and we'll see where the Giants are at then. So everyone enjoy your week and take care.